Hi, everyone. My name's Greg Knight.
And I'm Ricardo Avila.
The Popping Collars marketing department has let Ricardo and I know that we have a problem with attracting and retaining younger listeners. You know, because we're old.
So we've recently purchased a Zoom Millennial Translator for our podcast promos so that young people will finally know what we're talking about. Let's fire up.
Since we're the longest running Episcopal podcast, we have a lot of shows sitting in our archives.
Stop the cap. You are straight up wildin'. All that mid stuff is TLDR.
That's why we have the PC Side Pod Take 2, which allows us to go back and reevaluate some of our past episodes.
Leo pointing meme. Stop gaslighting me, bro. You're trying to red pill me right now with this Finsta account. I don't even know what that is.
Oh, God.
I don't even understand. What is Leo pointing meme?
For real, we haven't always had the greatest takes in the world, and some pop culture has shifted pretty significantly. Take 2 gives us the chance to admit where we made mistakes and highlight how pop culture has evolved over the last couple of years.
I was today years old when I learned about this. I apologize. I was not familiar with your game. You got that dog in you. NGL. I did not have this on my 2023 bingo card.
Oh, man. So check out Take 2 right here on the Popping Collars feed and relive our wisdom and more frequently our embarrassment firsthand.
This is fine. We live in a society. Chef's kiss. I was this close to rage quitting, but this idea is pretty grammable. Y'all are the GOAT Episcopod. GOAT Episcopod.
Okay, Ricardo, we can turn off the translator and head off to lunch now.
I could go beast mode on some food right now. TTYL, peeps.
We may have a problem.
What is TTYL?
Talk to you later.
Oh, for God's sake.
Hi, I'm Greg Knight.
Hey, I'm Ryan Parker.
And this is PCTV, a Popping Collars side project where we randomly select a current TV show that you should be streaming right now. Ryan and I have each picked 6 shows apiece from the top streaming apps, and this month, talking about the Netflix series Kaos.
Mortals, I made you, and this is how you repay me. Really, we're meant to be together.
Today you will.
Well, what?
Leave him.
We need to make destruction really sing.
Dad, some humans are nice.
They don't matter.
I defy the gods.
You're where you belong, down in the dark!
What is this place?
Why didn't I turn to stone?
Because you're dead.
Serve the gods. Great honor, right?
And it'd do you all good to remember that.
Why'd you do that? Why'd you shoot me?
Who are you?
What if I told you you could see your wife again?
They don't give a shit about any of us.
Tell the truth, Orpheus.
Everything they know, everything they love,
Lies. I am one person. What can I do?
All the best things are human.
A line appears, the order wanes, the family falls, and chaos reigns.
They put poop all over our statue. Why would you think that that's funny?
It's chaos out here. I mean, it's kind of perfect title for the times that we're living in, or who knows, who cares anymore. There's so much I want to talk about with this. series. But before we get in, let's tell people what it's about.
Well, let me give you the log line for the show. And I've got to tell you, this log line, really, really small. So we're gonna have to load up like a lot of toppings on these blank nachos.
Yeah. I'm partial to chicken. I'm partial to jalapenos.
Oh, okay.
If you ever
buffalo
come visit me in
sauce?
Jackson, Mississippi, I'll take you to a place that does tamale nachos. They put tamales on top of their nachos. Tasty.
I love it. I love it. Okay, here you go. Logline. A modern day contemporary retelling of Greek mythology. Period. The end.
That's what it is.
That is exactly what it is.
It is a tapestry, though. It is a visual tapestry. I think there's so much about the series to commend. And I would have watched many seasons of this. This is going to be a talking point later. But it is weaving threads from various Greek mythologies into what feels like a reflection, a commentary on faith and fandom and belief and exploitation and violence. And see, so you can add all of these ingredients for your nachos.
Yeah, that's
that
like all
there's
I'm
a lot
hearing
going
is-
on here.
Yeah, all I'm hearing is cheese, black olives.
No, hold the olives. Get out of
chicken,
here.
Buffalo sauce, sour cream. Okay, why did you pick Chaos for us, Ryan? Let's get into that.
Well, because it was new at the time when we picked it. Jeff Goldblum first. Stop. That's it. We'll watch anything with the mighty Jeff Goldblum, but also because of it was about mythology. I felt like it was a little different, could potentially be a little different to some of the other series we talked about. Although having finished it just last night, I think there are some comparisons to other series that we've talked about, and we can discuss those moving forward. But that was it for me. I love mythology. I love stories about quote unquote the gods. I think there's a lot to unpack here in that way, and it was 8 episodes. Not just Jeff Goldblum, a great cast that very recognizable folks that you may not know their names, right? But you're like, oh, I know that person. I saw them in, X, Y, or Z. So yeah, that's why I picked it. What's your gut reaction to it?
So first of all, I will say that I was so nervous when I first started watching this because Jeff Goldblum, I don't know if you know this, Ryan, he's sort of fallen into like a Nick Cage parody of himself over his.
Oh, come on now. Really?
Like, he plays Jeff Goldblum for pretty much all of his projects, right?
Fair enough.
Like
fair enough.
He is that character in the Thor movie and in like the Disney Plus series that he was on and stuff. Even in those apartment commercials, like he's the Jeff Goldblum character,
Yeah.
And so I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get with this. I'll also say this with my initial takes is that the Popping Collars universe is having a bit of a Cliff Curtis resurgence, a little Cliff Curtisance, if you will.
Okay.
Because Betsy and I just ran into Cliff Curtis when we were talking about The Piano for our Going on 30 series. And then in that episode, we did like a top 5 Cliff Curtis portrayals of different ethnicities, and here we have a Greek Cliff Curtis playing Poseidon. It's great.
Yeah. with some really interesting tattoos.
That's right. Well, I think that
interestingly positioned tattoos, I should say.
Do you think that Cliff Curtis, a famous Maori actor, do you think that those are his actual tattoos?
No. Well, no, I did wonder that. It's an interesting position, right?
Yeah, it's all around his crotch. Yeah.
It's the first time I've ever seen that. And now I'm Googling Cliff Curtis tattoos.
Yeah, it's like tattoo pants or maybe tattoo booty shorts, if you will.
That's exactly what it is. It's tattoo booty shorts. Yep, that's it. And it's just really, it's a look,
Yeah.
He pulls it. He can pull it off. He can pull it off.
Absolutely.
I don't think that's not real. I'm just looking. Sorry, guys, everybody listening in behind the curtain. He has a tattoo of a manta ray.
That sounds accurate.
Yeah. So he does have tattoos. I doubt that's a real one. Okay. Anyway, continue. Sorry to interrupt.
So I'm with you on the cast. Like all of these people are just great and stand out performances. I mean, Eddie Izzard is in this, for God's sake.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my biggest takeaway from the entire thing, and we're going to definitely get into this when we get into Industry Corner, is it could have been a movie to me. And I think maybe it should have been a movie.
Yes. Just because you can doesn't mean you should on the TV side.
Yeah, I think that the Eurydice Orpheus story is just so strong. And so many people it's one of those Greek myths that is sort of like Perseus and Medusa, or the Prometheus story, which this also touches on, or Pandora's box. I mean, there's a lot of Greek myths that like people know, even if they don't really know Greek myths. And Orpheus going to Hades and rescuing Eurydice is like one of those stories. And I just think that like that is a compelling movie script that you could get down to like 2 hours and 15 minutes and cut like some of the extra stuff from this show, like the Minotaur stuff and all of that. You could cut like some of these side plots and you would have a pretty strong movie, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking too, like, what if it was like a trilogy? But I mean, essentially, that's what in terms of length, that's what we have with the series, basically, maybe even shorter with the series. I can see why. So this is written, directed, and produced by Charlie Covell. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce the last name. A British filmmaker, storyteller that created The End of the Effing World, which is a big hit on Netflix years ago, who studied English Lit at Oxford University. So somebody who's grounded in the classics, and that really comes through in the series.
Mm-hmm.
And it does feel very visionary in the sense that this is like, it didn't feel like it was, kind of death by committee, if you will. I felt like it knew what it wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we're really getting into the industry stuff now. Let's talk a bit more about the series itself. I mean, there is a crisis of faith in the world that has been created in this series. And there's Olympia I was a little unsure of the way they use that word. They, throughout the series, they say blessed Olympia.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a celebration of the gods, or there's an eve of the celebration of the gods. But there also is a plot to overthrow the gods.
Yeah.
And Zeus, played by Jeff Goldblum, detects this. He's feeling that he is not as beloved as he needs to be. He's a very jealous and petty version of Zeus. And so the series, what we have of the series, the 8 episodes, is about this, right? There's this underground plot to overthrow the gods that has something to do with a series of prophecies about both the gods and some humans on Earth.
Well, you know that labor for them is never in vain.
There we go.
Today,
Okay. Ga-ga-ga-ga-ga. Come on,
dedicated to
show
our
me.
gods, blessed Olympia.
Give it to me. Give it to me. What is that?
Who did this?
Zeus?
Who did this?
It's not what I think it is it? Is that
Who has desecrated the gods? Who has defied my power?
the gods?
Zeus?
God.
Yeah, I would just add that this overthrow of the gods involves a plot sort of created by Prometheus, where the prophecy of Eurydice going to Hades and overcoming death, being pulled out from death back into life by Orpheus, would be sort of the domino that would knock over the gods. So that's kind of the central story that's playing in the background.
Yeah. And it's set in a very, I wanted to look up, and I guess I could do that now, but I wanted to look up where it was shot, because it's a very European feel, but also has a very Australian feel. It's beautiful.
Mediterranean to me.
It feels Mediterranean. It's very beautiful. The costumes are great. it has shades of Baz Luhrmann, if you will, and it's very visually rich and on the surface world. But when you go to Hades, when you're in what is essentially limbo, it's all in black and white, which adds another layer of beauty to it. And I thought that was a great contrast and a nice touch. There's not much more to say about the plot, in terms of kind of what it's about or what's happening. There's a lot to talk about in terms of mythology and belief and faith and fear and division and all these things. So maybe from a technical side, are there anything that stood out to you about the series that you particularly liked as we move into kind of like the come for, stay for scenes and sequences, things like that?
Yeah, let me just go straight into best scene, sequence, episode, or storyline for me, which is the thing that I'll say that I really liked, which is the first episode. I think the first episode of this series, from start to finish, is sort of a masterpiece in table setting. I knew exactly who every character was and what their motivation was for why they were doing what they were doing.
Yep.
And that is not easy, like, especially when you have an ensemble cast like this. Now, granted, you're coming in with, if you have even a rudimentary understanding of Greek mythology and how, the gods are on Olympus and the people are here, and the gods are sort of constantly messing with the people, then you kind of get a sense of like how the story is going to unfold. But all that is to say that I thought the first episode was great. It establishes the world, it establishes the conflict, it establishes the stakes, and I would dare say that it's nearly impossible to not at least start episode 2 after watching this episode.
Agreed. Yeah. That's good. I think I share that with you. I remember watching, my wife and I started it. She didn't finish. She's got a lot of other stuff going on in life. She's picky about what she watched, but she even was like, "Oh, this is really intriguing."
Yeah.
And it's got to be fairly captivating for her to kind of stick with it given her schedule. So yeah, I agree with you. I really like that. I think for me, my scene and sequence is closely tied to come for, stay for. Okay. So if I can bridge those two, I will, because I agree with you about the opening of the first episode. Of course, come for Jeff Goldblum and gods and all these things, but I stayed for Dionysus and Naban Rizwan. I think he's such a good actor. Very compelling. I wanted more of him. I don't think we got nearly enough, especially for his longing for a relationship. And I think, again, this is coming back to where we are with the series. If there is more of this in some capacity, then he has to take a bigger role, because I think his character is compelling. I think he is a fantastic actor. Also surprised to see David Thewlis as Hades, who I just think the world of. What a fantastic actor. But I think everyone gives great performances in the kind of the come for, stay for. But any scene or sequence with Dionysus, I thought was so fun, because you could have taken him to just be a complete lush, pleasure-seeking god, but there's a layer of complexity there that I really appreciated in his character. What did you think in terms of characters to go along with your scene and sequence?
Yeah, so of course, like, it's hard to see a show that's headed up by Jeff Goldblum and not be incredibly curious about what that means. Yeah, and when the show first starts, I think that I kind of felt like it was falling into that trap of, they just asked Jeff Goldblum to do Jeff Goldblum-y things. But what quickly starts to happen is that you remember that Jeff Goldblum has an incredible sinister side to him. It's so funny because I recently watched The Fly for the first time in a long time. And, he starts that movie doing Jeff Goldblum-y, things, that sort of, hyperactive, kind of fast talking, quirky, nerdy character. But then eventually becomes like this character of true horror. And I think that that happens on this show. And you realize that, like, oh yeah, Jeff Goldblum does have that gear where he can look like a cartoon 1 minute and look like the scariest dude in the room the next.
Talking into it. There you go. There you go. Feel good?
It's fine, thanks.
Look, Mommy approves. Right?
I'm not scared of you, Zeus.
You should be.
Well, I'm not. Even though you seem to be trying to behave exactly like our father. You did it. You destroyed Dad. Just don't become him. You need to listen to what I'm telling you.
Great. And what is that, exactly?
There are forces even greater than us. Even if you don't like it, you know that there are. I think the prophecy is a warning. It's not too late. You must reset the frame, Zeus. It was never meant to be all souls. If you won't do that to protect the family, then I will. Please. I'm just trying to help.
No, you're not. You're trying to destroy me. You want to rule in my place.
What?
Yeah. You're an ambitious little weasel.
Zeus?
That's what you are, aren't you? You never liked that I just gave you death. You always felt like you deserved more than that, but you're the runt, Hades. You're where you belong, down in the dark!
So it came for Jeff Goldblum, probably stayed for Stephen Dillon as Prometheus, right?
Yeah.
Because one is that he is the narrator character.
Yeah.
So he's the character that is explaining to us what's happening in the plot and why, because he's the ghost in the machine of the plot.
Yeah.
But the other side of that, I would say, is that, you know, he quickly becomes caught up in the plot and is no longer omniscient to what's happening. And when that goes down and all of a sudden he's subject to chaos and not the fate that he thought he was, you start to question as a watcher, like, oh wait, no one knows what's going to happen. That's pretty scary. Yeah. So
in the myths, which some of you may have read, I'm the one that Zeus punished for giving humans the gift of fire. I'm a hero, but you're thinking I'm just some prick who murdered his boyfriend, right? Wrong. Zeus punished me because I stood up to him. I told him he'd become everything he hated. He didn't take it very well.
It's very rude not answering the door. Very.
What are you doing here? Look, I can do it. I can do it.
It is not your fate, Prometheus. Zeus is coming after you. If you want to stop him, you need to listen to me. There is a greater plan, Prometheus.
The greater plan. Yes.
So I would say that that's where it shifted for me, was his portrayal of Prometheus, which I thought was just so layered, because it's sympathetic in the way that Prometheus's story is sympathetic, but it's also a little narcissistic at the same time. It's a little egotistical. You know, this idea of I'm going to make things happen in a very particular way. And he would typically close out the shows, and the shows would always end on some kind of clever line. And so that's the other thing that I liked about it.
Side note, Jeff Goldblum used to perform jazz at a bar up the street from our apartment in LA, and we got to see him once or twice. And that dude could work a room.
Yeah. I imagine he's charismatic as hell. Jeff
yes.
Goldblum.
Yes.
The other thing that I would say is, just on a David Thewlis note, not the first time he's played a Greek god. He was Ares in the Wonder Woman movie back in the day.
That's right. That's right.
David Thewlis, you know, a lot of people are going to remember him as like Lupin from the Harry Potter series, but he was in that. Do you remember that Omen remake that they did with Liev Schreiber and stuff like that? I always felt like that was an underrated
Yeah.
Omen remake. So I would toss that out if you're looking for any post Halloween watching. Go back and rewatch that Omen from the 2000s. I thought it was solid.
Well, I got to listen in on an interview with you and Andrew Keitlinger earlier today, talking about Halloween 4. Thank you. I'll be watching that this afternoon.
Just ignore how bad the Michael Myers mask looks in it, and
yeah,
otherwise that movie's great.
I think the time has come to tell you the truth about how the gods were created. Zeus hated his father. They all did. And so one day, after years of torment, Zeus killed him. He attacked him with such violence, such passion, such fervor, and a most remarkable thing happened. At the point of Kronos' death, Zeus absorbed his father's soul. It became part of him. It gave him power. And that power was intoxicating. He wanted more. It took Zeus years to work out how he'd done this. But when he did it again. And again. And again. Eventually, Zeus got tired of all the killing. And so the frame was invented. Not to renew human souls, but to harvest them, to liquidize them. The whole process was industrialized, sanitized. The gods drink it to stay immortal. And so the lie must be preserved. The myths maintained. The humans distracted. That's what Zeus relies on. Distraction.
Hey, let's get into theology corner on this because, first off, I was going to say this earlier, but the series, if anything, if it does anything, I think it could potentially drive viewers back to reading some of these classic texts. These are very compelling characters and figures in literature and the history of literature and film and TV. I'm intrigued by some of what this is saying about religion and belief, or faith and belief. Anything jump out at you to start before I get on my soapbox?
There's just one central question for me, which is the way that religion wrestles with and never can quite come to terms with ordered fate. So the ordered nature of God is how Judeo-Christian understanding would say that. Mm-hmm. And random chaos, which is what we experience in the world. Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, all of that stuff that, if you were a Greek god believing Mediterranean and you fast forwarded those beliefs to the current day, you would be like, why did Poseidon send this storm to wreck, Western North Carolina? That just doesn't make sense, right? And so it becomes this question of, where does religion live in that tension of saying, oh, no, the universe is ordered and there's a generous, benevolent God that oversees all of it, and the randomness of violence that we see in the world around us on a daily basis? What is that?
Well, I would tell you that's been a key thing for me in my own theological and religious and spiritual journey, reckoning with the randomness of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it becomes more stark when you think about why am I allowed to live a life of relative comfort when so many people, the majority of the planet, does not.
Right.
And that imbalance of comfort, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I do think is the profound call of the Christian faith is to make that more equitable, right? To make that more even.
I mean, that's what the text says. Yeah. But it's also
to not sound like a communist, but I feel like when you ask that question about the tension between the chaos and the order, there's some sort of all-knowing God that is over all of this and has a plan. Well, that God looks more like Zeus to me than it does any sort of God that Jesus resembles. You know what I mean? I think the gods on display are more like what hardcore evangelicals think about God than what the Bible tells us about God.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, that like, these are beings that need to be appeased somehow.
Yeah.
And if you flaunt something in their face, then you are subject to their, tempers and all of that stuff. Like because I was thinking that with the first episode, one of the catalyst events of the first episode is that there's a memorial to Zeus that's being unveiled, and what's unveiled is a big pile of shit with a message on it that says "F the gods," right?
Yeah.
And so if somebody were to create a piece of art with a crucifix and a jar of urine, right? There's like a group of evangelicals that would say you're calling down the wrath of God on you, right? Which is what
pearl clutching.
Yeah, which is what this show sort of proposes. Yeah, from
and it's particularly Zeus. I'm like, man, Zeus sounds like the God that like evangelicals believe in, or like the God that evangelicals believe in. Let me reverse that. Would sound more like Zeus than Jesus. Like, it's just really interesting to me the way that Zeus thinks about punishing humans for their lack of faith and worshiping him and desecrating a statue. The fear and the division is like just something that we as a people buy into wholeheartedly. I mean, I think this is a comment on that as well, that, what's the line? Was it Chuck Colson or somebody that said, a movement can survive without a God, but it can't survive without a devil?
Well, there's also a little bit of main character syndrome that we run into as well, especially with sort of Protestant Christianity, which is like this really egotistical belief that like our beliefs and our behavior affects the way that God sees the universe. It's like, slow down there, Jimmy.
And this is to sound very nihilist, or that it affects anything at all. Like,
yeah,
I don't want to go there. I'm not going down that rabbit hole, but like, yeah.
Well, I don't mean that to say that, God can be concerned with whatever God wants to be concerned with. I hate the argument of, oh, my concerns are too small in the eyes of like the God of the universe. The God of the universe can do whatever God wants to, right? But all that to be said, like, there's this level of guilt that gets placed on Christians of like, don't do the wrong thing, don't think the wrong thing, otherwise a boogeyman God is going to throw you into hell or something. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know that that's necessarily a helpful model either, right? Like, the God that's in the scriptures is one that at the very beginning of all of it in Genesis takes the chaos, the formless void, and turns it into order, right? That doesn't sound like a God that's sort of concerned with eternal punishment of anything that God makes. If anything, that God is trying to figure out how to make things better for the created order. I'm preparing
a homily for a wedding next month. And, I think a central question that I'm wrestling with whenever I think about stuff like this is, why is there something and not nothing?
Yeah.
And I spin that out, right? But why is there attraction? Why is there emotional connection and not nothing? And obviously, philosophers and scientists and theologians are going to have thoughts on that. But those are all just attempts to answer that question. And I think you can trace that back to, why does God move on the face of the waters? Like in Hebrew scripture, why does God feel compelled to? And for me, it's love. Like, as cheesy as that's going to sound, I feel like that God does that out of love. And I think that's early Christians interpreting Jewish texts, weaving this narrative. And then obviously, God is love. Okay. Then how do we talk about that in terms of this desire to see order or flourishing, if you will?
The way that the show plays with fate and the fact that a chaos agent like Eurydice could throw everything off. It's an interesting way of looking at how power works. For as much as we think of like Zeus as the king of the gods and like, the power of the gods on this show, or even if we think about the God of the universe, we don't necessarily think about them being subject to any kind of power. But often in our human context, on the show, it's Prometheus using human machinations with the fates in order to sort of overthrow the gods. And just like we were saying earlier, in some sort of Protestant Christian belief, there's this idea of, well, if I believe the wrong thing, then God has to do this, right? Like God has to punish me, or God has to. And it's like, God doesn't have to do anything, right? And your behavior doesn't dictate what God has to or doesn't have to do, you know?
Yeah. That's a Zeus-sized ego.
Yeah.
One of the other things too, to say, like, maybe thematically here, one of the things I do find interesting about the Greek mythology and Greek gods is just the humanness of it all, and how taken collectively, they all seem to represent different sides, or potentially represent different sides of our personalities or the human experience or emotion. And you see that on full display in the series, right? Of desire, of love, and of jealousy, anger. And one of the things I really was intrigued by, and for a lot of the characters, is that, and I also think in just creation myths writ large, is there's always a transgression, right? There's always some foundational transgression, and you see a lot of those on display here in this series, whether it's, Prometheus or Orpheus.
Yeah, I love the fact that the gods that are on the show are Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and Hades. And then like some, there's some demigods sort of floating
Dionysus.
around, like Dionysus and stuff like that. But for the most part, we're talking about those four. And those four they're gods of chaotic elements. So like Zeus is the god of storms, and Poseidon is the god of the sea, and Hera is like this goddess of information on the show, right? Hades, of course, the god of death. And it's this idea of these are all things in human civilization that can't be controlled. That can't be like, you can't put them in a box. You can't control them. Like they are chaotic elements in the world. And yet, they're also like the gods are subject to chaos as well.
Yeah.
Even though they're in control of these chaotic elements, they are themselves, victims of chaos, of disorder. And so I think that that's a fun little like play that the creators of the show are having, I think, which is, you think that you're powerful because you can control a storm, but actually, these humans that are defying you can ultimately bring you down.
Let's go to Industry Corner.
Yeah, because we need to talk about the fact that the show's over.
Which is, I'm sorry to your listeners, really pissing me off.
Yeah.
Like, had I known at the time that we picked it, I probably wouldn't have picked it.
Right.
But this one feels dumb to me. Like, and then again, I think it's just a symptom of a more stupid system. I Googled when it ended, I was like, Chaos season 2. No, it's been canceled. I think I may have heard in the ether that it was canceled. And I don't even know. Greg, you're gonna have to help me because I'm kind of like speechless with this. It's like I understand why the reasonings are gonna give, but Jesus, like viewership was not high enough. It's gonna be on the platform forever. Give people time to discover it and see.
I would imagine that. Okay, so
they have an algorithm.
If I'm putting on my Netflix, if I'm putting on my Netflix hat and headed off to Los Gatos to visit my friend Ricardo at St. Luke's and stop by the Netflix headquarters on my way, then what I would say is that it's probably not a case of it not having enough viewers so much as it's a case of it not having enough viewers for the amount of money that it costs to produce. This show looks, and I can't imagine that it's not very expensive. And I would think that Netflix is saying, great, if it's at the top of the board, great, then we will absolutely pay for it. But if it's number 15, like, we're not justifying spending this much money on this show. Now, I will say this, they made a big splash with it. I felt like it was marketed well. I felt like it was promoted well. A lot of
The
times,
key art was amazing. All the posters and social and stuff was, as they tend to do, was fantastic.
yeah, a lot. And sometimes, Netflix will put stuff on their platform and it's like you just kind of discover it and you're just kind of like, I had no idea this was even on here. Not so with this. They heavily promoted it. If I had to guess, it just didn't bring back the numbers that they wanted it to for the level of investment that they were making into it.
Which, is really interesting to me. And I understand it. I can get frustrated. I know how the world works. It's just really frustrating when it's a series that you kind of invest a little bit of time in, and you want to see more. And maybe another streamer or studio will pick it up. Maybe not. Maybe they can refigure. Covell had 3 seasons planned, which again is kind of back to my idea of a trilogy in some way. So I would instantly watch that, and so I understand maybe for the budget, for the numbers didn't make sense. Maybe there were a lot of viewers, but not enough for the expense. So I do understand that. But I think what it is always going to make me more suspicious of upcoming Netflix content. Like, why would I take a chance on something if I just know it's going to end with a cliffhanger?
Right, which is the very thing that gets the show canceled to begin with, right? If you're waiting to see if it's going to have life, then before you start
That's a good point.
Then it's going to kill the show before it has the chance to
and
have
I
life.
feel like this is that type of show.
Yeah, totally.
I have a friend who won't watch anything unless he knows that there's going to be multiple seasons.
Right.
Unless it's billed as this is limited series, right? Like Chernobyl, something like that. I know that this is going to be it. And even then, he won't watch that until all the episodes are available.
Yeah.
And which I totally understand, because it's almost like reading a book, right? Why not as a creator, or do you think creators have an alternate ending ready? Can it cost that much more to shoot an alternate ending, to be like, look, we can end it here and we're done? Because I don't feel like that would have worked for this series, and it's even more frustrating because of the way that it ends. You have Hera presumably calling Athena and saying, ready the troops. And you have Dionysus, who's ready to embark on his next chapter. You have Eurydice, who is ready to announce the lie that is Hades.
Come back from the dead, yeah.
Back from the dead. Wow. Season 2 could have been great. And so it wasn't like it ended on a whimper. It ends on a bang. But I wonder if creators moving forward to say, look, I can see this going 3 seasons, or I can put a bow on it in 1. I wonder what that conversation's like. At least this series, this made me think about that. And
I gotta imagine that they, for this show, and I can't, listen, so much of this is speculation, but if you watch enough stuff, you can kind of start to put together an idea of like how these things look. I have to imagine that there's probably 2 Charlie Koval scripts for this series. There's a television version of this script and there's a movie version of this script.
Yeah.
Netflix got to Charlie and was like, hey, we'll make your show. And he makes the television version of the script. And unfortunately, like, this goes back to what we were kind of talking about with Sex Education, which is that it is a cold analytical business model that Netflix is. They are not, this is not HBO or Max or whatever, where, you may have a producer that backs a project because it has artistic merit.
Yeah.
This is just numbers, and like Stranger Things does the numbers and Chaos did not, and that's just what it ultimately comes down to for Netflix.
Yeah.
And then even dumb stuff, right? Like, I don't know, like 13 Reasons Why, or whatever the young adult, wing of Netflix is. Like, those things could live forever because Netflix knows that we're going to watch them.
Well, this is I'm done venting.
So just like humans are subject to the whims of the gods, so too are we streamers, subject to the whims of Netflix.
Of Mount Netflix.
The god of
All right.
entertainment, Netflix.
I do, it's hard. And it's really hard to recommend the show now. I'm thinking about how to end our comments about this before, if I don't know, we're spinning the wheel again. It's really hard to say anything to potential viewers even. It's like, why bother? Like,
yeah, I would say, listen, if you're gonna watch, this show is worth watching. Just
do you
for
want to
the
spend
ideas
6
alone.
hours of your life and then be angry?
Yeah, the show's worth watching just for the ideas alone. But just know that it's going to end on an unresolved cliffhanger. Your viewing self. Are you okay with that or not? That's just what it is, So
yeah.
But if you get,
Yeah.
I do think it's worth going in eyes wide open though, and say, without spoilers, there's no resolution to this show, or at least there's not a satisfying resolution to this show. So, so if you're okay with that chaos, great.
See what you did there.
I should just roll credits, right? Like
we're done.
As soon as I hit the word chaos, like
we're done.
Yeah. Let's spin the wheel.
Go.
I'm going to solve. All right. Cornucoro cabinet.
There's no reason to spin the wheel because there's only one show left, Ryan. It is my Prime Video show, which I am not a great Prime watcher. I've never been able to, I don't know. I've never been able to get into things like the Jack Reacher series or the Tom Clancy series that they have on there and stuff. So here's what I'm proposing. I'm proposing yet another oldie for our show. I'm saying we go back to Fleabag. So Fleabag is my Prime Video pick.
You can tell I'm enthusiastic. We'll do it. Are we saying bye to the audience? This is very professional.
Oh, yeah. Ryan, thanks so much for hanging out on Mount Olympus with me.
I had a good time. I wish I could have stayed longer.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell you what, let's get out of here before this whole thing falls apart around us, because that would be that would be a bad place to be when chaos finally arrives.